We'd like to welcome Candy Barasch. Candy is one of the Art News top 200 collectors. Candy, many thanks for taking the time to come and spend with us.
Thank you for including me in this very inspiring think tank, I guess we're going to call it now.
Think tank, right? Yeah, we've benefited now. We're benefiting from the fact that we've heard several people say lots of different things, and I think it's very important. We have the view from one of the major collectors in the United States. What do you think about Aware, and what do you think about its potential? Is it relevant in your collection? Maybe you should first begin and talk to us a little bit. You've been collecting for over 20 years. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing, your approach to collecting, and why you've collected.
Well, as we spoke about last night, collectors have always collected. They've collected their whole lives. There's kind of a need to amass that is compulsive through your whole life. So maybe it starts with baseball cards, with stamps, with records, whatever it is. Collectors are collecting, and often they're collecting multiple things at once, whether it's wine, handbags. I mean, we know I certainly have my fair share of those as well. I started collecting black and white vintage photography, actually, because for the only reason it's all my husband and I could agree on at the time. And it just kind of took off from there. And I've been collecting pretty much mostly contemporary art, works on paper, multimedia for 20 some odd years.
How does philanthropy fit within in relation to your collecting?
It's constant. I mean, it's constant because, as you know, the arts are incredibly underfunded, and artists that I love, and I collect artists of my time. So artists that I love that are putting on shows and trying to make ambitious work don't always have the funding for it. And museums, and funny that Adam just spoke, because the Whitney is near and dear to my heart. I'm going to say a donor to at least one show a year. He spoke of Josh Klein. I'm probably the lead sponsor of Josh's work. So it's constant. It's a responsibility of a collector to support the artist making the work that you're collecting. And in terms of Aware, in all candor, I hadn't heard of Aware before.
You're not the only one that is there.
Which is unfortunate, because it's hugely important. I would say, agreeing with Sarah, one of the first things I would do is just tweak the mission statement to include 21st century artists, because I think that those are the artists of our time, and people of our time who are going to be writing now the story, the history, right? The history was written by men, so I think that's a lot of why women are not included going back. But going forward, it's really important that women feel empowered to tell the story of female artists today and going back. And in terms of my collection, when I think about, you asked a general collection, how does this inform on collectors? So what's happening now, Lisa spoke about it in the United States, is there's two things happening. There are serious collectors who are trying to tell a story, right? Either thematic or historical. And when I think about what I'm buying, one, first, is it visually appealing? Do I like it? Does it speak to me? What its historical context. Well, how do I know that if I'm missing so much of the story? So this is hugely, hugely important. And going forward, how does this push art history forward? Again, I need that context.
And I think if you had been aware of Aware, and as I say, obviously,
I like what you did there.
If you had been aware of it, do you see it being a tool that's relevant for you as you're looking at art, as you're going out, as you're thinking about making decisions?
Well, yes. I mean, a lot of my collection touches on abstraction post-Warhol, right? But there are many artists that I'm not even aware of that would have made me informed on a different decision or gone deeper into something. I have a lot of women sculptors oddly enough. But, and once I realized that I was doing it, I want to keep doing it going forward, but maybe even stepping back and saying, okay, how do I fill this out? Because I think of my collection as kind of a living, breathing thing, and it's telling a story. I mean, it really is. When somebody's going to go back, they're going to be able, art shapes values, art is expressing things that are invisible in society, and there's kind of no clearer picture of what happened at a specific time than through art, through the history of art. And so I want my collection to be a snapshot of exactly that, and not necessarily a catalog historically, but it's important to know what came first, what.
And one of the things that we talked about last night, which we didn't have time to discuss a little more in depth, is that and I'm going to put words in your mouth, so please excuse me, is that if I understood correctly, your interest in art and your interest in collecting is really not about gender. You're interested in artist and creation, and you're not thinking in terms of gender.
Well, I think we all kind of crave like post-identity time, right? Where, we can just look at art and think of art and not necessarily who is making the art. But I don't know if you can ever necessarily remove that from the equation. I just came from Venice, and I was so struck. Well, one, there was a female curator, but that the whole international pavilion was women artists. But that was just happened to, well, I'm sure it was contrived, but that wasn't necessarily part of the press. It wasn't something that people it wasn't shoved down their throat, but yet it was hugely impactful and informative and interesting that was the case. And I like that, and I want to see more of that, of course it was all women.
But you said to me that what you liked about it was all women, without emphasizing
yes,
that
it
it was
wasn't
women.
shoved down your throat.
Artists.
It wasn't in the PR,
artists.
it wasn't in the press. It wasn't something that when I got there was like, oh, I'm so excited to see it was just I fell upon it and it unfolded in front of me, and it was like, wow, this is incredible.
What did you think about that?
About Venice?
Yeah, about the all-women international pavilion.
Like you, a little bit like I did in Elle and Centre Pompidou, just using a tool that has been historically filled with men, as a majority, with only women, without saying it and proving that it's possible, and it works very well, and it's fantastic.
It is fantastic.
So it shows indirectly that there's so many interesting women artists that it's like the hidden part of the moon that, as you say, you can collect without thinking about what you're collecting, but at some point you have to, I think. You have to look at the gender question, and a lot, I would say the majority of private collections are majority of men artists, I think, really. When you're historical, not when you're collecting young artists, but most of the private collectors have made big collections, like historical, pre-war or just after, because the information they had was about men artists. They lacked the information.
Well, I also think there aren't so many what we would call blue chip female artists in the marketplace, while those people were building their collection.
So it's not a critique. I'm just saying that they built from whatever information they had at the time, and Aware is really, I think, making a change because it's offering information for these people, so that they cannot say anymore, I didn't know about these women artists. Now they have. The information is out there. So maybe they don't know about Aware, but they should know about Aware, really, if they're collecting seriously, because we're unique. There's not another Aware.
Well, we went back to the Google search, right? It needs to just be more prevalent in the conversation. And I loved Adam's ideas of engaging women leaders, because
you think that's relevant?
I think it's
to begin from that point of view.
Hugely important. I think there isn't what woman, I mean, even as a collector, I mean, because women collectors are often kind of, you know, you hear,
They are?
yeah, I mean, and historically, women are the most important collectors, right?
Yes,
Gertrude
they've been
Stein, the
building
Cohn
the
sisters,
museums.
right? Building the museums, and but not necessarily for notoriety. You know, it's a whole different thing that happens. The buy two, get two, you know, those are men. You know what I mean? Like swinging their names around, and nothing against that, right? I mean, I'm not sure that's the best policy, because basically you're just looking for the wealthiest collectors, not necessarily the best collectors.
Yes.
And then the work ends up flipped at auction because they've said, hey, I gave one to a museum, I've done my part, I don't need to worry about this going forward. But we want to protect women artists today.
I come from the same background as you. I mean, I studied art history, mostly white male art history. And I really, again, it's a personal story. I left a museum to create a nonprofit. I had zero money because I wanted to make a change. And it was crazy to do that, to take that risk. And it's still crazy. Every day it's crazy.
Well, thank you for doing it,
Yes,
because
it
it,
does.
means, it means a lot.
Maybe we should end, that's a perfect note to end. Thank you, Candy, for your input.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Camille.
you,
I hope-
Camille, for bringing this to our attention and doing something hugely important. Thank you.